My daughter lifted my place card off the Thanksgiving table, set it on the windowsill the way you'd set down something that had died, and told me the real gift would come the day she finally signed me into a home. Then she turned to her father-in-law, pressed an envelope into his hands, and said it was a cruise. Vancouver to Alaska. 2 weeks, balcony suite, $18,000, the works. I stood there in the good shirt I'd ironed twice, holding a card I'd written that morning, and I left. I didn't say much. I'm not the kind of man who makes a scene in a restaurant. But that Monday I drove down to the credit union and I canceled the payment that had been keeping the roof over her head for 3 years, and after that, the only person paying for my daughter's life was my daughter. It took her a while to understand that. It took her losing the house. Let me back up, because you should know I'm not a cruel man, and I want you to see how a decent father gets to the point where he'd do a thing like that. I spent 38 years in furnaces, started as a kid sweeping a sheet metal shop in Sudbury, and finished running my own little heating and cooling outfit with 2 trucks and my name on the side. You learn things in that trade you don't expect to use on people. You learn that a house will tell you where it's losing heat long before the hydro bill does. There's a cold spot by a door frame, a draft that comes off a window when the wind's from the north, a furnace that short cycles because something upstream is wrong and nobody bothered to look. You learn to put your hand flat against a wall and feel for the place where the warmth is leaking out. I could do that with a building in my sleep. It took me a lot longer to learn to do it with my own family, and by the time I did, the heat was mostly gone. My wife passed 3 years ago this past spring. 41 years married. The cancer took 11 months from the first scan to the last morning, and she handled it with more grace than I'd have managed if it had been me in that bed. She was the warm one. She was the one who remembered birthdays and kept the cards people sent and knew which neighbor was going through what. After she was gone, I rattled around our bungalow on the West End like a marble in an empty tin, and I'll be honest with you, I would have done just about anything to feel like I still had a family. That's the part I want you to hold on to. That's the part that cost me. We had the one child, a daughter. We tried for more and it didn't happen, so she got everything, all the worry, all the savings, all the second shifts. When she wanted to take dance, I took on weekend service calls. When she got her acceptance to university down in southern Ontario, we sat at the kitchen table and figured out how we'd swing it, and "we'll figure it out" meant I refinanced this house and my wife went back to part-time at the pharmacy at 54 with her bad knees. We were proud to do it. That's what I keep coming back to. We were proud. She did well enough. Came out the other side a bookkeeper, sharp with numbers, the way her mother was sharp with people. She married a fellow who'd never had to figure anything out a day in his life. Pleasant enough, soft hands. A father who owned a mechanical contracting supply business down in the Newmarket area, and a way of letting his wife do all the talking. I didn't dislike him. I didn't think about him much at all. After the wedding, they bought a place north of the city, more house than 2 people need, and that's where the trouble I didn't see yet was already quietly running. The first money was a loan. That's what she called it. $5,000 for a work trip to Vegas with some people from the office, and she'd pay it back inside 3 months, she swore. I transferred it that same night and felt good about it. Felt useful. She never paid it back, and when I brought it up the next spring, she laughed at me. Actually laughed. A little puff of air down her nose, and said, "Dad, that wasn't a loan. That's just family." I let it go. My wife was sick by then, and I didn't have a fight in me. Then came the wedding. Then came the comments about the house. My house. Every visit there'd be a remark. The bungalow was too big for one man. The property taxes were eating my pension. Wouldn't I be happier in a nice condo somewhere? Something low maintenance, free up some equity. I built half the additions in this place myself. My wife picked a kitchen color off a chip she carried in her purse for a month before she committed. It wasn't a property. It was the last room she was ever in, but to my daughter it was a number, and I was the obstacle between her and the number. and somewhere in there I'd started covering her mortgage. It happened the way those things happen. A little at a time, never all at once. First it was a rough month. Then it was just till the spring. Then it was a pre-authorized payment coming straight out of my checking account every month, $2,840 into her mortgage at the bank, and her thanking me for the first little while, and then not thanking me at all, just expecting it, the way you expect the furnace to come on when the house gets cold. 3 years of that. I did the math once, sitting at the kitchen table, and I had to do it twice because I didn't believe it the first time. Over $100,000 when you counted the loans and the wedding and the rest, gone out of the money my wife and I had bled for. And what I'd bought with it was a daughter who took my place card off the table and set it on the windowsill. So, the dinner. It was Thanksgiving, the second Monday of October, the leaves already down off the maples and the first real cold coming in off the bay. She'd booked a private room at a steakhouse halfway between her place and her in-laws, and 3 days before, on the phone, she'd told me to come 6 o'clock. Don't be late, Dad. I have it in my own handwriting in the kitchen calendar. I brought a card and a framed photo. Her at about 7, gap-toothed, on the dock at my brother's old cottage. I thought she might like to have it. When I got there, the table was set for 4, and there were 4 chairs, and not one of them was for me. My son-in-law was already on his phone. My daughter looked up at me like I was a salesman at the door. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I said it was Thanksgiving and she'd invited me. She said she'd said no such thing. She'd told me they were doing it with family this year, and could I please not make this awkward? And then her in-laws walked in. The father-in-law in a sport coat, the mother carrying a little gift bag, and my daughter's whole face changed, went warm and bright the way it used to go for me, and she jumped up and hugged them both. She had the envelope ready. The cruise. The mother actually put her hand to her chest. "Heather, this is too much." And my daughter said, "Only the best for family," and turned and looked right at me when she said it. The father-in-law, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. He nodded at me and asked, lightly, what she'd got for her own dad. And there was a little silence, and my daughter filled it. She said, and I'll remember the words till they bury me, that the real gift would be the day they could finally put me somewhere I'd be looked after and out of the way. Somewhere I'd free up resources for the people who actually mattered. She smiled when she said it. The room had that steakhouse hum, glasses and low talk, and her voice cut right through it. I put the card and the photo down on the windowsill next to my place card, and I said, "Happy Thanksgiving," and I walked out into the cold. I didn't take the truck right away. My hands were shaking too hard to be safe with it, and anyway I needed to move. I walked, past a Tim Hortons with the lights on and 2 cabs idling, past a hockey rink with the boards up for the season, past a closed branch of the same bank that held her mortgage. I thought about my wife. I thought about how she used to say you could forgive a person almost anything if they were sorry, and how the trouble with our daughter was that she'd never once in her life been sorry, only caught. I sat on my own front steps that night with the porch light off so the neighbors wouldn't come over, and somewhere around midnight the heart cooled into something harder and a lot more useful. I've spent my whole life finding the cold spot, putting my hand on the wall and following the draft back to where the seal failed. And I realized I'd never once done that with my daughter. I just kept turning up the furnace and paying the bill. So the next morning, I started looking for where the family had broken, and I had a feeling I already knew which year to check. It changed about 18 months back, right after she took the job at her father-in-law's company. Before that, she'd been a bookkeeper at a little firm downtown, doing fine, nothing flashy. Then suddenly she was making real money, more than the job should pay. And the trips started, and the bags, and a leased SUV that cost more than my first house. I'd told myself she was finally doing well. Now I sat at the table with my coffee going cold and I thought, no, a machine that's drawing twice the power it should isn't running better. It's running wrong, and nobody's looked. There was a girl, a woman now, who'd been my daughter's best friend since university. Maid of honor at the wedding. She'd been around our house so many years, my wife used to set a place for her without asking. And about a year and a half ago, she just vanished from my daughter's life. No fight that anyone mentioned, no explanation, just gone. I still had her number in the old address book my wife kept by the phone. I called it. She didn't want to meet at first. I could hear it, but I told her I was trying to understand who my daughter had become, and I thought she might be the only honest answer I had left. And after a long quiet, she said she'd meet me by the boardwalk of the lake, and to come alone, and she said this last part low. To be careful, because my daughter wasn't who I thought she was. We sat on a bench with the lake gray and choppy and the wind coming straight off it. She held her coffee with both hands like she was cold even though she wasn't. And then she told me. My daughter had been stealing, not skimming a little petty cash, running fake invoices through her father-in-law's company. Suppliers that didn't exist, materials never delivered, the payments routed where she could get at them. She'd been at it over a year. This woman had seen the paperwork on the desk with her own eyes, asked about it, and gotten told it was creative accounting. And when she pushed, my daughter turned on her. Told her flat out that if any of it ever came to light, she'd make sure the blame landed on the friend instead, that she had it all worked out. So the friend left, walked away from a 15-year friendship because she'd seen who was underneath it and she was afraid. The Vegas money, the wedding, the cruise she'd just handed her in-laws like party favors, the leased SUV, the bags. Not $1 of it had been hers. Some of it was mine. The rest she'd taken from the man she'd just bought, an $18,000 cruise to impress. I asked the friend if she'd ever reported. She said she couldn't. She was scared of what my daughter would do, and I understood that. I told her she had my word. Her name would never come up. We shook hands and she walked off down the boardwalk with her shoulders up around her ears. And I sat there a while longer watching the chop on the lake. Here's where you might expect me to say I was heartbroken. I was, somewhere. But mostly, I felt the thing I feel when I finally find the leak. That cold, clear satisfaction of there it is. Now I knew where the draft came from. Now I could decide what to do about the seal. I want to be straight about how I went about it, because I thought about it carefully and I did it by the book. I'm not a man who breaks the law to settle a score. I didn't want to. I didn't have to. My daughter had already done the part that broke the law. All I had to do was make sure the right person knew and let the consequences run downhill the way water does. I went to the public library. I didn't want any of this coming off my own machine. And I set up a plain email account and I wrote to the father-in-law. I kept it cold and factual, the way you'd write up a failed inspection. Dates. The way the false invoices were structured, the kind of supplier names to look for. I mentioned that company money had been spent on gifts to his own family, which meant his name was tangled up in it whether he liked it or not, and that his books would not survive a serious look. I read it over 3 times to make sure there was nothing in it but facts. Nothing that pointed back at a heartbroken father or a frightened friend. Then I sent it, and I drove home and poured a finger of the rye my wife and I had been saving for nothing in particular. He answered the next morning. Short. He said it couldn't be true, but that he'd look into it immediately, and he thanked me. By Friday, my daughter phoned me screaming. She knew it was me. Of course she did. I was the only one with the reason and the nerve. She'd been walked out of her own father-in-law's office with a box of her things while the receptionist watched. He'd had bank records, transaction logs, the invoices, and in the middle of screaming that I'd ruined her life, she said the thing out loud. Finally, I was taking money, all right? Are you happy? It's easy money, he never checks the books. And even though I'd known it for 2 days, hearing it in my daughter's own voice still landed like a boot in the chest. Her husband had said nothing the whole drive home, she told me. Just sat there. then locked himself in the spare room and wouldn't look at her. And it was my fault, all of it, for being a vindictive old man who couldn't take a joke at a dinner table. I didn't argue. There's no arguing with a fire. You just keep your distance and let it find out there's nothing left to burn. Then she went after me, and I'll give her this. She was clever about it. I'm a Legion man. Wednesday nights, sometimes a Saturday, a few of us old fellows and a couple of widows from the neighborhood. The Monday after she got fired, I went to put a meat draw together for the branch, and 3 people I've known for 20 years wouldn't quite meet my eye. Then my neighbor 2 doors down begged off coming over for the game with an excuse so thin I could have read the paper through it. Something was wrong in the wiring of the whole street, and it took my next-door neighbor, a retired school teacher, the closest thing I've had to a brother since my wife passed, to finally walk me into his kitchen and show me his phone. Someone had been posting about me. Facebook, the neighborhood app, a fake account dressed up to look local. The post said I was a danger to women, that I'd been aggressive with my late wife before she died, that I'd been seen following ladies around the grocery store, making comments, hanging around where there were kids. Each one was careful, vague enough that you couldn't disprove it, ugly enough that nobody wanted to ask. By the time the account got reported and pulled, half the street had seen it. That's why nobody'd called me back. My own daughter had taken the cleanest, decentest 40 years a man can put together and tried to set them on fire. My neighbor, God love him, didn't believe a word of it, and he wasn't the only one. The sharp old widow across the road, a woman who'd been on every committee in the parish since 1985 and missed nothing, had taken screenshots of all of it before it disappeared. Just in case that girl tries it again, she said, and she'd already told 3 other people it was garbage. We got a few folks into my living room, and I laid it out plain. My daughter was furious about money, and this was her getting back at me, and I'd stake my pension on every one of those posts being a lie. I showed them my record. 40 years, 2 trucks, my name on the side, every furnace in half the parish installed by these hands. The teacher next door shook his head and said they should have known me better than to wonder. The widow across the road said that girl was always spoiled and she'd seen it coming since the daughter was 16 and throwing parties that woke the whole street. And then a strange thing happened in that living room. People started talking about their own. The brother who drank his way through every chance anyone gave him. The sister who only called when she needed a cosigner. The schoolteacher said it took him years to understand the difference between helping his brother and feeding the thing that was killing him. The widow said love without a fence around it just turns into something a person can walk all over. And one of them, a fellow who'd done the books for the curling club for 30 years, looked at me over his coffee and said something I've kept. He said, "You want to help someone who's gone wrong with money. You don't hand them more of it. You put it in writing. Interest. A real payback schedule, in ink witnessed. If they won't sign it, you've got your answer about whether it was ever help they wanted." I sat with that one a long time. I told them, before they left, what I'd been paying, the mortgage. $2,840 a month, 3 years running, on a house I'd never been invited into for so much as a coffee. The room went quiet. My neighbor said that was more than his whole pension. The widow said if a woman can buy an $18,000 cruise for people who aren't even blood, she can pay her own bills. I'd been thinking the same thing for days, but it landed differently coming from people who had nothing to gain by saying it. That night I sat at the kitchen table with my checkbook and my bank statements and the pre-authorized payment form, and I understood I'd been treating my own daughter the way a bad homeowner treats a furnace. Throwing money at the symptom and refusing to find the cause year after year, because finding the cause meant admitting the whole system was rotten. I'd been keeping a 35-year-old woman warm at my own expense while she stood at the window telling everyone I was the draft. Monday morning I was at the credit union before they unlocked the doors. The young woman who'd handled my accounts for years knew me on sight and started in cheerful, "Here for your usual, are you?" I told her I needed to cancel the pre-authorized payment going to my daughter's mortgage. Her hands stopped over the keyboard. She pulled up the account, and her face did the thing a professional's face does when they're about to talk you out of something. She said it gently. If I stopped, the mortgage would fall behind almost immediately. There'd be missed payments, then a notice, then in Ontario it's called power of sale. The lender could move to sell the house out from under them. Was I sure? Was I in some kind of trouble myself? No, I told her. No trouble. Just clear, finally. She made me confirm it 3 times and warned me 3 times. And every warning felt like a door I was glad to close. 20 minutes of paperwork. Then I signed, and I walked back out to the truck in the cold October sun. And I'll tell you, I felt lighter than I had in 2 years. Not mean, not triumphant. Just done. The furnace was off. The money that had been hemorrhaging out of my wife's and my life every single month was, for the first time, staying home. I didn't hear from her for 10 weeks. I learned later the bank had let a payment or 2 slide before the system caught up, and after that the notices started. The first I knew of it was a phone call on a gray afternoon in late winter while I was downstairs changing my own furnace filter. A man should do his own, I always say. I came up, wiped my hands, and saw her name. Her voice was small. That should have warned me. Small was a tactic. The bank had sent a letter, she said. Something about missed payments, about power of sale. She didn't understand. The payments had always just happened. She'd assumed they were still happening. I sat down at the table. I asked her if she'd ever once made a mortgage payment herself in 3 years. There was a silence that answered before she did. Then I told her plainly I'd stopped the payments in October. The day after Thanksgiving. She came apart. How could I do this to her? They take the house. Where were they supposed to go? And then, when the screaming didn't move me, she switched. And I watched the whole playbook come out. The same one she'd used at 16 when I caught her sneaking back in. First, the small apology that admits as little as possible. She'd been stressed. She hadn't meant what she said about the home. Surely I knew that. Then her mother. Mom would want us to work this out as a family. Mom always said family sticks together. I told her not to put her mother's name in her mouth to get at my wallet, because her mother also believed a person should be sorry before they ask for mercy, and she'd never managed the first part of that in her life. Then the promises. She'd visit every week, Sunday dinners again, like when her mother was alive. She'd pay back every cent with interest, and I almost laughed at that, because the curling club bookkeeper was right. You offer the loan paper to a person and you find out fast whether they ever wanted help or just money. I asked her how exactly. She'd pay anything back with no job. She said her father-in-law would surely take her back once it blew over. Those were just rumors from a bitter employee. She still couldn't say the word stole. Not even now. Not even to me. She tried the grandchildren next. Did I want my grandbabies out on the street? I reminded her she didn't have any children. We're trying, she said. We want them. How can we start a family with no home? And the lies were stacking up so fast and so flimsy I could practically hear them tipping over. Finally, she said the thing that's supposed to be the trump card. If I didn't help her, I'd never see her again. Did I want to lose my only daughter forever? And I said quietly, I haven't seen you since Thanksgiving. You made sure of that yourself. That stopped her. When she spoke again, the tears were real for once, not performed, and she said she'd sell the cruise tickets, $18,000, every penny, straight onto the mortgage. I told her she should have thought of that before she bought a cruise for people who aren't her family, to impress them with money that wasn't hers. She said, please. She said, I'm your daughter. She begged. I got up and looked out the kitchen window at the back garden under its dirty crust of March snow. The garden my wife planted. And I keep going because I can't bear to let it die too. And I told her the truth, the whole hard truth that it had taken me 3 years and 1 ruined Thanksgiving to find, that the daughter I'd raised went somewhere I couldn't follow the day she decided money was worth more than the people who gave it to her, and I wasn't going to keep paying ransom to a stranger wearing her face. Then I said goodbye, and I hung up, and I unplugged the phone from the wall, and I put the kettle on, and my hands were steady. That's the part I noticed. My hands were perfectly steady. She lost the house that summer. I didn't get it from her. We weren't speaking. I got it the way you get everything in a place like this, sideways. The widow across the road has a cousin in their area. The notice had gone through. They'd loaded a U-Haul in August and moved into an apartment on the other side of the city. No rescue came. The father-in-law kept his distance. Turned out the investigation backed up every word of that email, and a man doesn't keep a thief in the family once he's seen the books. My daughter took a job in retail. Her husband, the soft-handed boy, found work on a crew that didn't belong to his dad, doing something with his hands for the first time in his life. Real money, real hours, real consequences. I don't say that with any joy. I say it the way you'd note that a furnace finally got fixed after years of someone refusing to call anyone. As for me, I got my own back, the parts of me I'd let her spend. I lost a bit of weight. My blood pressure came down off the ledge it had been sitting on. The savings account that had been bleeding out every month started filling again, slow and steady, and for the first time since my wife died it felt like security instead of guilt. I started a Tuesday gardening morning with a few of the church people, the school teacher next door, and I split a load of firewood and a season of bad coffee. And there's a widow named Joan from the Legion. Hikes the trails out past the conservation area. Does the crossword in pen. Who's let me buy her a double-double a few Saturdays running. Nothing serious, but she makes me laugh, and I'd forgotten I could. This spring on my 65th, a handful of neighbors came by with a casserole and a cake. The widow across the road insisted on baking herself. My neighbor clapped me on the back on the porch and said, "You did the right thing, you know. The hard right thing." And I sat there afterward with a coffee, looking at my wife's garden coming back green at the edges, the way it does every year whether anyone deserves it or not. And I thought about what I'd want her to know if she could hear me. I'd want her to know I finally learned the difference between keeping someone warm and burning the house down to do it. I'd want her to know I put my hand on the wall and I found the cold spot. Late, but I found it. And I'd want her to know that the day I stopped paying for my daughter's life was the most loving thing I ever did for her. Even though she'll likely go to her own grave believing it was the cruelest. Because some lessons a parent can't teach with money. Only with the silence that comes after the money stops. That's not revenge. I'm too old and too tired for revenge. That's just a father at last, refusing to be the reason his child never had to grow up. The kettle's on. The garden's coming back. And the phone, when it rings now, is somebody I'm actually glad to hear from. I keep coming back to that windowsill. The place card with my name on it, set down beside a wine glass like something that had stopped being useful, and Heather not even looking at me when she did it. For 3 years I'd kept paying, kept showing up, kept telling myself that if I just gave a little more she'd remember who I was. And the hard thing I had to admit, sitting alone on my own front steps that night, was that I'd had it backwards the whole time. You don't earn a person's decency by spending money on them. You either raised them to have it or you didn't, and no check ever written has bought a single ounce of it after the fact. What I did wrong wasn't loving my daughter. It was confusing love with payment. Every time I covered a loan she laughed off. Every mortgage payment I made without being asked. I told myself I was being a good father, when really I was teaching Heather that there were no consequences. That the warmth in this family ran one direction and never had to be earned. A person learns exactly what you let them learn. She didn't fall out of the sky cruel. I helped build the floor she stood on while she said it. The turn, when it finally came, didn't come from anger. It came from sitting down at my kitchen table and looking at the thing straight, instead of through the fog of guilt. The way I'd look at a cold draft in a house and follow it back to the seal that failed instead of just turning up the heat and paying the bill. That clear-eyed looking is the part I'm proudest of. Not the anonymous email, not the canceled payment. The looking. Refusing to keep lying to myself because the truth was going to hurt. And then there was the doing, which was its own thing entirely. It's easy to know the right move and never make it. To understand you should stop paying and keep paying anyway because the silence afterward feels unbearable. Hanging up that phone, unplugging it from the wall, letting the house go quiet and staying steady through it. That took something I wasn't sure an old man still had in him. It turned out I did. So if there's anything I'd hand to you across this table, it's this. Be the kind of person who keeps their word and expects the same. That's the soil everything else grows in. Be willing to look at the hard truth even when it's about someone you love, because comfortable lies cost more in the end than any honest pain. And when you finally know the right thing, find the spine to actually do it, even when doing it feels like losing. Heather lost the house. I lost a daughter I'm not sure ever fully existed. But I got my own life back, and my late wife's garden still comes up green every spring, whether anyone deserves it or not. And these days the phone only rings with people I'm glad to hear from. That's not nothing. After everything, that's most of what a man can ask for.